All right, let's pull back the curtain on the Victorian era, that stretch of time from 1837 to 1901. This was a period of absolutely staggering, almost dizzying change in Britain. It was an age of steam, steel, and empire, for sure, but it was also an age of deep, deep anxiety. So that brings up a really fascinating question. When your entire world is constantly shifting, with new tech and new social rules popping up practically overnight, where do you even go to find a sense of order? Well, for a whole lot of Victorians, the answer was, maybe surprisingly, in the glow of the gaslights, the theater. Okay, so let's set the stage literally. To get what was happening in Victorian theater, you first have to understand the world it was reflecting. I want you to think of the whole era as this giant social pressure cooker with all these incredible forces building up steam just under the surface. And you've got to see how these things were all connected. The Industrial Revolution, right? It yanks millions of people from the countryside and crams them into these booming, chaotic cities. This creates this powerful new middle class that is absolutely obsessed with respectability and having a strict moral code. All while the British Empire is expanding across the globe, stretching the very idea of what it means to be British. All of this chaos created a very real public need for some kind of emotional release, and even more than that, for some moral certainty. All that social pressure had to go somewhere, right? And it found the absolute perfect release valve in the theater. So now we're going to see how the stage went from being this exclusive thing for the wealthy to becoming mass entertainment for a brand new urban audience. Let's just trace how this happened. I mean, as early as 1809, you see the public's passion with the old price riots, where people literally protested ticket price hikes for weeks on end. Then, Queen Victoria herself starts going to the theater all the time, which suddenly makes it a respectable family outing. But the real earthquake, the moment everything really changed, was the Theatres Act of 1843. And yet, this was the total game changer. Before this law, only 2 major theaters in London were legally allowed to put on serious plays. This act just blew that monopoly wide open. All of a sudden, smaller, cheaper theaters could pop up all over the place, and it just unleashed this massive wave of creativity. It made going to a play affordable and accessible to the working class for the very first time. The doors were literally thrown open to everyone. So, the big question is, what were all these new audiences flocking to see? The answer, in one word, was melodrama. It was the perfect genre for the times. It was a formula that gave a stressed-out, uncertain public exactly what they were craving: good versus evil, presented loud and clear. And the name itself gives you a huge clue. Melodrama literally means music drama. And the music was absolutely crucial. It wasn't just background noise. There were specific musical cues that told the audience exactly how to feel. A heroic swell for the hero's entrance, or some sneaky, sinister music for the villain. It was like a cheat sheet for your emotions. And right here, you see the core of why people loved it so much. There was zero moral ambiguity, none. The hero was pure virtue, often a hardworking sailor or a poor factory girl, and the villain, pure evil, frequently a greedy, rich landlord who was trying to kick a poor family out of their home. For an audience that was really anxious about money and class, this was just so satisfying. You always knew who to cheer for and who to boo at the top of your lungs. So what you end up with is this incredibly potent formula. You've got your clear heroes and villains, super intense emotions, unbelievable special effects, which don't worry, we're getting to, and plots that dealt with everyday anxieties like poverty. But the single most important ingredient was the ending. No matter how bad things got, virtue was guaranteed to win. In a world that felt chaotic, that was a powerful, comforting promise. But look, melodrama wasn't just about the story, it was about the spectacle. Theater managers knew that the real technological wizardry was a massive draw, and they were in a constant race to outdo each other to create the next big, jaw-dropping effect. Can you just imagine sitting in a packed theater and watching a building seem to actually burn to the ground right in front of your eyes? Well, new innovations in gaslighting made that possible. In a famous play called The Octoroon, the climax had a steamboat exploding in flames on stage. For the audience, this wasn't just some story. It was an absolutely electrifying, visceral experience.
And they didn't just stop with fire. Oh no. Major theaters started installing gigantic water tanks under the stage. Using hydraulic lifts, they could stage these incredible underwater rescue scenes, or raging storms, or dramatic shipwrecks. The realism was just breathtaking, and it was a huge part of what had people lining up around the block night after night.
The railway was the defining technology of the age, right? It was this huge symbol of progress, but also a source of real anxiety about speed and danger. So, of course, they put it on stage. Theaters would stage these incredibly complex and thrillingly realistic train crashes, perfectly mirroring the excitement and the peril of their new industrial world. This quote really gets to the heart of it all. The special effects weren't just a fun little gimmick. They were central to the whole emotional impact. The how of the story, the spectacle, the fire, the flood, was every bit as important as the what. It was a total sensory overload, in the best possible way. So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this all sounds a little dated, right? A bit simple, a little over the top. Surely it just faded away with the gaslights. But you would be wrong. Melodrama's influence is absolutely everywhere today. And in this last section, we're going to look at its powerful and kind of surprising modern legacy. Now, as the century went on, drama definitely got more complex. You had these problem plays start to tackle social issues with a lot more nuance. And then came the realists, guys like George Bernard Shaw, who brought this deep psychological complexity to their characters. But melodrama didn't just disappear, it just evolved. It basically embedded its DNA into all these new forms of storytelling. And you can see exactly where that DNA ended up. That clear moral line, the super high emotions, the focus on spectacle. Just think about it. Early silent films, they were basically melodramas on a screen. Detective stories, clear heroes and villains. TV soap operas, they thrive on that emotional intensity. And our biggest summer blockbusters, they are built on the exact same foundation. So when you boil it all down, the takeaway is this. That Victorian formula was just too powerful, too effective to ever really go away. The core structure, a good hero, a dastardly villain, huge emotional stakes, and a spectacular ending where good wins, is still one of the most powerful storytelling engines we've got. Which leaves us with one last thing to think about. The next time you're sitting there watching the latest superhero movie, with its clear-cut good guys, its world-ending stakes, and its mind-blowing special effects, ask yourself this. Are you just watching a 19th century art form with a 21st century budget? It's a pretty fascinating question about where our stories really come from.